webinars for the GMCS, or the Guyana Marine Conservation Society. I'm a biology graduate from the University of Guyana, and I hold a postgrad in tropical forest ecology from Imperial College, and I volunteer with GMCS as vice chair. We have quite a pretty good lineup today for you, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat box. I do have just a few housekeeping rules. Kindly, if everybody can mute, and also please, if you can take off your cameras as well. Only the presenters we will have on as we speak. So let me quickly introduce the presenters, and then we'll go straight into the presentations. After which, the three presentations, you are free to ask your questions, or you can ask your questions during the session, and we will provide answers after. So we want to make this as interactive as possible. So our first presenter is Marie Fraser, and she's going to be presenting on macro marine life, the potential impacts of oil on the marine environment. Maria Fraser is from Berbice. She's a graduate of the University of Guyana, also in the biology field, and she just completed her Master's of Marine Science in China. Her study focused on marine and aquatic toxicology, or pollution, specifically linked to heavy metals, hydrocarbons, microplastics, and other toxic compounds. She is also a volunteer and member in GMCS. Mikael Amsterdam will go second. He's going to talk about oil and gas and fisheries and fisherfolk. He's a fisheries officer attached to the Ministry of Agriculture, and he's played an integral part in several local projects aimed at improving the management of Guyana's marine resources. He's a staunch supporter of initiatives which support the sustainable development of marine resources and ocean conservation. He's also very active in the Guyana Marine Conservation Society and the Marine Spatial Planning Network, where he engages in various discussions, research activities. Could you please mute your mics, please, when you're coming in, because I'm hearing activity. Somebody's mic is on. Xavier. Xavier. Can you please mute? And we can also have other participants take off their cameras. I'll be very grateful.
Hi, Dr. Rockwell, you're mute.
Sorry. Yes. Online. Okay, let's hope that's our last hiccup for the evening. But thank you for that, Maria. Yes, so continuing with Mikael, he is also part of the Marine Spatial Research Network, where he engages in various discussions and research activities related to the marine environmental protection and development. Our last speaker today will be Banko Holder, and he's going to talk about sargassum in marine life. I mean, this is a very important aspect, I think globally, not just for Guyana, and the effects of oil and gas on essential fish habitats. Banko is a prospective graduate of the University of Guyana and BSc in biology, and his research project addressed the socioeconomic impact of sargassum on artisanal fishing industry in Guyana. Some of his other research interests also include the potential uses of sargassum and marine and coastal ecology, as well as fisheries. So there we have the lineup. And as you can see, I think we all have to keep an eye on how we're muting and unmuting, and also with our cameras as well. I'll ask everybody when the presenters are presenting to just take off your cameras. Hello, Joshua, I see you. Thanks for tuning in. I see people are tuning in from all over the world, and we're really grateful to have you here today. So I'm going to ask Maria if you can go first, and after that, Mikael, you come in immediately, and then Banko, and then we will end with a session where we can have a discussion. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you, Dr. Rockwell, for that interesting presentation there. So good evening, everybody. My name is Marie Fraser, and tonight I'm going to enlighten you about the potential impact of oil and gas on the marine life. Now, what do you know about marine ecosystems or marine environment? Well, marine environments are basically distinguished by their high salt content. It's an interaction with the abiotic and biotic surroundings. Now, marine waters cover more than 7% of the Earth's surface and 90% of habitable space on Earth. It is the largest ecosystems we can think about. So there are many types of marine ecosystems. We have rocky intertidals, mudflats, corals, salt marshes, estuaries, seagrasses, and of course our pristine mangroves. Also, our marine ecosystem, they extend outwards to the offshore system, which include surface ocean, deep sea, and our sediment floor. All of these ecosystems that we have identified provide us with some sort of ecological functions, like bearing into consideration our mangrove ecosystem. They provide water quality enhancement, coastal protection, they act as carbon storage, they provide some sort of cultural and spiritual identity, tourism, they provide other produce like timbers. There's also pharmaceutical products from our marine environment, and also one of our most important is the fishery production. Now, today, our marine ecosystems, and one of those threats I'm going to enlighten you about tonight is about the oil. Now, oil is basically a non-renewable energy that is formed from fossils from over thousands of years, and they contain harmful compounds, mainly hydrocarbons. And these hydrocarbons are hydrophobic, meaning that they do not mix well with water. Also, these hydrocarbons, they tend to cohere with persistent organic pollutants like heavy metals and microplastics. Now, oil spills can be caused by people making mistakes, equipment breakdown, natural disaster, or even deliberate attack by terrorists or wars. So there are different types of accidents. We have blowouts, we have explosions, we have structural failure, and of course, transportation, which is leakage in our pipelines. Now, every stage of the offshore oil and gas industry is basically a close interaction with our marine environment from startup to decommissioning. And any deviation from the normal function is considered an accident or an incident. And each accident occurs in a combination of natural or technical condition, which can have an impact on our environment in many ways. So what happens when an oil spill occurs? Well, an oil spill affects the physical, chemical, and the biological complement of both land and water. It affects the survival of both plants and animals, thereby preventing oxygen from entering the ocean and leading to organism death. Now, the dispersal of oil spill basically depends on external factors such as wind, waves, and currents. Now, let's take, for example, one of our pristine marine ecosystems, our mangroves and the seagrasses, which are a host for many of our biodiversity and also a primary ground for our fisheries. Now, when an oil spill occurs, it coats the entire surface of the roots, and therefore it prevents oxygen from entering the underground, therefore causing death to the underwater roots, plants, and the creature who would be more highly susceptible to the damage of petroleum product. Hence, these habitats becomes unsuitable for feeding, nesting, and other services they provide for marine life. Intertidal areas, mangroves, they become inhabitable, and the nursery grounds are destroyed, and it would take years and years to recover. In animals, an oil slick will form on the surface and they will prevent locomotion in the organism. Now, the oil-coated marine mammals like seals, dolphins, otters, whales, manatee, they will suffer from hypothermia and eventually dies. What happens that these animals, they will surface to the top of the water in order to breathe. When they do that, their skin becomes covered in oil and it reducing their buoyancy. Eventually, they end up sinking and die. Most of the younger animals are more vulnerable to these oil spills. Now, around the world, there are many oil spills, and one of which I'll give you an example is Exxon Valdez oil spill, which occurred in 1987. Now, this Prince William song has been a pristine wilderness before the spill. It killed 250 birds, 3,000 otters, 300 seals, 250 bald eagles, and 22 killer whales. There was a collapse in the salmon and herring fishing. Now, the herring were basically a lucrative source of income and has never been fully recovered onto this day. 20% of the oil spills are still present in 91 beaches today. 40% of the seal population die, and it took them about 25 years after the oil spill for that to actually recover. Fishermen went bankrupt. The economies of small business suffered. Approximately 2.8 billion US economy loss, and 26,000 jobs were affected. People turned into alcohol, and then they eventually become separated. Nevertheless, here are some pictures that show some of the consequences of oil spill on the marine life, where we have our pristine marine ecosystem being affected, or economic important species, the crustacean and the fish are no longer, they're covered in oil and is not good for consumption. Hence, as a result, there are some social and cultural impacts. Significant loss in the customary and recreational fishing, sustainable on the communities who depend primarily on fishes. Our coastline in Guyana, we depend a lot on fishing. So what would happen if an oil spill occurred? We would not have any fish there. There's a reduction in the amenity and recreational values, particularly when the oil reaches the shore. Also, there's some economic loss in terms of tourism, financial loss in commercial fishing industry, both because of the impact on the fisheries themselves and its market. And it will cost billions of dollars in terms of cleaning up that oil spill, as was seen in BP explosion in the Gulf of Mexico. Nevertheless, most of the toxic compounds of oil spill can build up as hidden contaminant through which they can enter the food chain. Now, when an oil spill occurs on the surface here, some of it would evaporate as methane gas, and some of it would form or cohere with other particles like the heavy metals and the microplastics, and it would settle into the sediments. Also, ocean current, wind, and wave would affect their distribution and move them from one end to the other. Now, in fact, it would have an indirect impact on our food chain. Now, this is a typical example of a marine food chain where we have our zooplanktons and phytoplanktons here, which are primary producers. So when an oil spill, they depend on sunlight for food. So when an oil spill occurs and it blocks the sunlight, therefore our phytoplanktons and zooplanktons would not be able to photosynthesize, hence they eventually die, affecting the small fishes. Now, the mackerel that feeds on the small fishes, the population would decrease as well, and they will also lead to bioaccumulation of these hydrocarbons and microplastics as well. So at the end of the day, we humans are the one who are going to consume these fishes, and they would also, what's supposed to occur, we'll have a decrease in the population of fish species present. Also, we would have bioaccumulation happening and biomagnification, where us at the end, we will be consuming heavy metals, microplastics, and oil. So we humans need to be mindful of what we put there into the environment, because indirectly it would have an impact on us, which would lead to some sort of health complication. Nevertheless, this brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you all for listening. I do look forward for your comments and questions. Thank you.
Excellent, Maria. We'll now ask Mikhail to line up his presentation and come in. Very good timing there. And
thank you.
Just saying, if you can start, if anybody has questions, you can start putting it into the chat box and I'll note them for the end.
Okay, thank you for that introduction, Dr. Raquel. This afternoon, I'm just going to go into a very brief overview of oil and gas fisheries and fisher folk. Note in the left corner of the screen, what's the story? As you read, you're going to get a little bit of the questions that our fisher folk usually have with regards to the development of offshore oil and gas. And this is not particular to Guyana. It's a general issue, particularly with the development of oil and gas when it's in the marine environment. Now, Guyana's marine space, like most, comprises of a 200 nautical mile zone, which is divided into 3 different areas, primarily the territorial sea, the contiguous zone, and then of course the deep sea area. Now, like most countries, Guyana has a fishing fleet that is categorized into many different subcategories, primarily the artisanal sector, which comprises primarily of wooden boats, usually not exceeding 23 feet in length, but sometimes can extend up to 50 feet in length. We usually have, after that artisanal, the next classification, which is the semi-industrial classification. Now, semi-industrial vessels are those which are usually powered by an inboard engine and can go a bit further within the exclusive economic zone, looking for fisheries resource in that area. And then, of course, we have a deep sea fishery, which is usually done by larger vessels, primarily of metal formation, doing either long lines or most frequently in Guyana, bottom dredging, particularly for shrimp and prawn species. Now, since the advent of oil and gas came into Guyana, fisher folk have not been that different from any other person in Guyana. They have all shared in that tremendous ideology that oil and gas can be good for the development of a country. Particularly, it can be good for them as a sector, as having cheap oil and cheap fuel products would actually increase their prospects of fishing, particularly if prices are reduced. Then it would be very good for them in terms of having a large production. Now, as we can see inside of the animation, the fishermen celebrating and so on. However, when we come to consider how fishing zones and areas are defined, we have here a very early example of a spatial plan which outlines some of Guyana's fishing areas. Now, the blue area is primarily one of our CBOB fishing zones. And of course, the secondary area as well is CBOB. What this doesn't take into consideration is actually the impact of our artisanal sector and and the areas from where they operate. Now, when we consider how the semi-industrial as well operate, these are fisher folk who usually try to target species that are sometimes highly migratory. And because of that ability to be migratory, they would often have to transverse any area that may be considered closed or have an exclusion zone set up for them. So fisher folk usually are not confined by this particular representation of the exclusive economic zone. Now, one of the things that is important, we need to consider what is the national contribution of these two large sectors. Now, in Guyana, of course, we know that the oil and gas sector is projected to contribute far more to our nation's development than our current contributions of fisheries. However, unlike the oil and gas sector, fisheries has a very high employment level, both directly and indirectly. We have over 15,000 persons who are currently employed within the fishing sector, versus the oil and gas development, which is a bit more specialized, and as such, the barriers to entry for persons entering for jobs are so high often that the amount of persons there are restricted. Now, fisheries contribute directly to our food security. And of course, oil and gas can do the same by way of purchase and not production. Oil and gas, while it develops our coastal area, is another area of contention with our fisher folk, in that areas that are under development previously may be covered in what we consider to be mangrove areas. They may be habitats for a lot of vulnerable species and a lot of our juvenile fish. And then, of course, fisheries by nature has the ability to be very low energy and environmental impact. Based on the amount of fish, once it is managed properly, a fishery can be quite not as energy intensive as exploring for oil and gas and even drilling. And then, of course, the downstream activities of fisheries impact the environment. What concerns about our fisher folk, what really worries them, fall into four major categories. These are not outlined in any particular level of importance, but of course, I know for most persons, like fishermen, there is one particular factor here that may be considered more important than the other, and that is oil spill. I know that Maria would have touched a bit about oil spill and its potential impacts to the environment. And as such, I'm not going to elaborate on that. Exclusion zones, whether temporary or permanent, is of course a very important aspect and a very gray area of consideration when we talk about our fisher folk and developing an offshore oil and gas industry. Fishermen like to have that access to the entire exclusive economic zone, particularly when they think about areas where fishing grounds may be or where fish may have migrated to. So the survey phase of oil and gas, usually the exploration phase, is another area of high concern as those energy intensive bursts that they have usually affect our marine life. The marine life that are affected by these energy bursts from the air gun can be either in the juvenile stage or the larval stage, but quite often it affects as well migratory species such as whales and with fewer incidences, turtles, and of course the activities of development which affect primarily fish landing sites and of course fishing areas. Moreover, as explained by Maria earlier, or discussed briefly rather, the impacts of biomagnification on the fishery is quite important and is a great concern because that really is the livelihood of a fisherman. Are these products going to be wholesome? As we move into exporting or even selling our produce to the wider world, I think it is quite important that we understand the quality of food that we produce. Traditionally, Guyana is considered to be one of the areas that produce food that is not contaminated and can be considered very wholesome. And as such, this, of course, is a main concern for fisheries. When we talk about what can we really do, whether fishermen can have their own space, we can see that the exclusive economic zone, at least in the case of oil and gas development, is really well defined. It has already been spatially planned in such a way that it takes up quite a large area of the exclusive economic zone. And that raises a very great concern as to where fishermen can normally operate and where, if most of these blocks are developed, where they will operate in the future. So understanding how we plan for our marine space is quite important, a tool that we should really utilize in terms of dealing with the issues that are facing our fisher folk. Now, compensation strategies. This is a very interesting topic because usually there are some ways in which our fisher folk are compensated for this exclusion or any activities which affect their livelihood. Primarily, it's done via cash, but there are, of course, ways in which it can be done that are alternative to cash, which may be oil companies performing some kind of corporate social responsibility through the provision of technology to allow fishermen to move to and from their grounds safely with the use of GPS or safety gears, funding different projects and technologies aimed at improving catching areas which fishermen actually have that right to, whether by the use of fish aggregating devices, which can be developed and placed within those areas. And then, of course, finally, funding research into the marine space so that we can understand the stock levels better and know whether or not fisheries are being affected by our offshore oil and gas developments. So just as a quick recap, the story really is centered around four main points. Having our fisheries represented at the highest level, not being considered a common fisher folk, being able to access the highest level of representation, whether through a co-op society or government representation, having creative strategies of compensation, which demonstrates the stewardship of oil and gas companies to fishermen, allowing the development of synergies between those two sectors, and of course, developing spatial planning tools, which would ensure that fisheries and oil and gas develop in a coherent manner and within their own regulated space. So I think that brings me to the end of my presentation, and I'd like to now hand the floor over to Dr. Thomas. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mikael. Very comprehensive. I see there's a comment there for you, which we will take after, which is very interesting. So I would like to see us have some discussion about that and fisher persons and EPA. I don't know if anybody from EPA is on. They probably won't be able to answer tonight, but something for us to consider. So Bankhole, you're ready? So just take it away.
Yes, good evening, everyone. My name is Bankhole Holder, and I will be informing you of sargassum in marine life and the effects of oil and gas on essential fish habitats. Now, what exactly is sargassum? Sargassum is a free-floating marine brown macroalgae that drifts across the ocean with the help of wind, waves, and water current. Now, in the Caribbean, there are two known species, namely Sargassum natans and the Sargassum flutans. They're made up of leafy appendages, branches, and round berry-like structures that aids in its buoyancy and keeps it afloat. Now, where is it coming from? Sargassum is native to the Sargasso Sea, which is an area right across the equator. And by the way, it's here to stay. Now, studies have shown that sargassum is growing at a faster rate than before, and this is because the conditions are more favorable, meaning more nutrients are present. This is basically from pollution from the agricultural sector by the use of fertilizers, which are being washed into our waterways. And also from warmer water, which is as a result of climate change, more so the rise in sea surface temperature. Sargassum, or the golden brown forest, is said to be a nuisance to many. However, in the ocean, it is considered to be good and it has many benefits. Simply because it supports the ocean's food webs, provides a home for many species. It is a nursery for endangered sea turtles, and it is a breeding or spawning ground for flying fish and other important species, such as the commercial and recreational fish species. It also increases the ocean's productivity for better fishing. It also promotes biodiversity for the many marine organisms that occupies it. Now, it is known that Guyana is an oil-producing nation, and as such, we must be aware of the effects of oil and gas on the marine environment, more so the essential fish habitats. Now, what exactly is an essential fish habitat, or EFH for short? This includes all types of aquatic habitats that are important for fish reproduction, its growth, feeding, and shelter. And some examples of these are seagrasses, mangrove forest, rocky shorelines, deep sea, coral reefs, wetlands, rivers, among others. Now, why is this important for us to protect them? simply because they generate sizable income annually, they promote job security, and they also protect the coast from several impacts such as rising sea level, which can further lead to floods. Now, with the routine operations of oil and gas, there are three potential impacts on the EFH, namely the noise and disturbances, effluent discharges, and oil spills. Now, it is known that marine organisms mainly communicate and navigate using sounds, and the exploratory and drilling processes of the oil and gas process cause a disruption to their daily lives. And as such, it forces them to migrate, sometimes abandon their habitats and even their youngs. And because of this movement, they are further exposed to more predators. However, with the increased levels of disturbances or sounds produced, this can cause stress to the marine animals, which can further lead to death. Secondly, untreated discharges such as produced water and drilling fluids from the oil and gas exploration, development, and production, it will have negative effects, on the water quality in nearby marine organisms, including the EFH. Lastly, oil spills. The severity of an oil spill is determined by the frequency and volumes of the discharge, which can result in major environmental impacts. Now, and this can be long-term damages to species, their habitats, and their breeding grounds. And a perfect example of this would be the marine turtles. Once this gets into their respiratory tracts, it causes them to suffocate and die. And once ingested, it becomes poisonous. Oil spills also create dead zones, and it also disrupts the underwater ecosystems. And recently, the Caribbean was placed on a watch for a potential oil spill by an oil tanker, the FSO Nabarima, which is located between Venezuela and Trinidad. Now, reports were that it was tilting. Now, if this did occur, and an oil spill did occur, then both countries would have suffered significantly and major damages would have occurred on their marine environment. Not those countries alone would have been affected, but the wider Caribbean. Now, with information like these on the potential impacts, the relative agencies or the relevant agencies can further make better and more informed decisions and create better policies to attack these issues. And moreover, it can help us to better plan our future decisions. With that said, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening. Hope you enjoyed. And I will now hand you over back to Dr. Thomas.
Okay, thank you very much. Everybody's doing very well with time. I think we were very strict, so I think there was a lot of practice. So that leaves more time even for discussions. We saw some interesting questions coming in the chat box there. I'd like Maria to take the ones on coral reefs. Now, one question we in Guyana would ask is, do coral reefs actually exist in Guyana? And I'd like the presenters to turn, or if you can all turn on your cameras so we could see you. So if Maria, you could take that, and also the question that was being asked about saltwater, and how would you predict in terms of threats to coral reefs from an oil spill, and also saltwater. I think she's talking about saltwater intrusion and impacts on freshwater systems.
Yeah, thank you there, Dr. Rockwell. Well, yes, in Guyana, we do have freshwater coral ecosystems, and I believe Mikhail can enlighten you a little bit more on that. Well, in fact, if an oil spill was or is the core there, we would also have some impacts on our freshwater marine ecosystems as well, because, and it all depends on the movement of our tides, waves, and currents, because I know during the season we have high tide and low tide, so water will goes in and out. So therefore, these organic hydrocarbons there, they can be flowing into those ecosystem and eventually settles. And when they settle there, they can cause abnormal growth, killing of the fishes, the crustaceans, and all these aquatic organisms that are present there. So again, we need to be very careful and mindful of or when an oil spill is or were to occur, and to study those environments very tediously. So I hope that answers Shaquille's question there. And I think Mikhail,
Yes.
you can talk a little bit more about our corals there.
Okay, Maria. Um, in terms of consideration, Guyana, like many coastal countries, would have, let's say, permanent structures submerged within our coastal shelf. Now, areas of convergence, low current velocity, favorable light penetration, and of course, the slow movement of slow changes in temperature, subsea temperature that is, do allow the development of many coral and coral-like structures, particularly sponges. Now, the Berbice area is one area that is um, quite notable, and I know we have some representatives of fishermen here within the chat, within this webinar, and they can probably post some of their experiences in the chat as well. But they are evidences of a lot of, or incidences rather, of a lot of coral and coral life structures that would have been retrieved by fishermen off of Guyana's coastline, particularly within the Berbice area. So I think it's important to know a lot more about what exists out there prior to having a lot of developmental activities as a means of ensuring that we can protect and, of course, conserve the areas within these precious locations. Maria, thanks for that.
Okay, that was really interesting. Mikhail, as you would have seen, there's another questions coming in. One person was saying, Parmeshwar, said that during the public scoping meeting by Exxon, they were told, these are artisanal fishers, that in the event of an oil spill, the currents will take the oil away from the area they fish in. And this apparently left several or many of the fishers really unconcerned. They didn't think it would really affect them in the event that there was an oil spill, sorry. And also they were assured that EPA would be putting measures in place to watch over the interests of the fishers. I'm not so sure about the accuracy of this, but I don't know if you have any further information on this. And also really, I think we all should be concerned if there's an oil spill, because I'm sure it will impact the fisher folk at some point.
Yeah, thank you, Doc. I know Mr. Jainarain's concern really is founded in some, truth, a lot of truth that is. If you look at a lot of the predictive modeling that is done by Exxon, if you even read some of the EIAs, it states explicitly that the movement of oil, or petroleum rather, from the area or site of the drill, it would go to the west-northwest area, and then out of Guyana's exclusive economic zone. And then they have a lot of strategies in dealing with transboundary relations between Guyana, Venezuela, Guyana, and Trinidad. But just to touch a bit on the responses to Mr. Jainarain, of course, Guyana recently got approval for its oil spill contingency plan, which is quite comprehensive. It took the Civil Defense Commission quite a while to put it together, but that was recently approved, and of course that is going to be put into practice. Moreover, I know Exxon has been putting in place a lot of training, particularly with oil spill recovery, and there's an oil spill management plan in place. And of course, there is the oil spill treatment handbook, which is handed out to all our fishers and so on. But in a nutshell, you can consider oil and gas to be one of the sectors which is largely regulated not only by the Environmental Protection Agency, but by several other local agencies. And as such, everyone is monitoring because it is quite new, of course. And if you have read the approval for the Pariara project, you would see there are a lot more safeguards in there that the EPA will be taking on. And as such, I believe that for now, most of the regulatory frameworks are there to allow the EPA and other agencies to look after the interests of our fishermen in the event of an oil spill. I hope that answers the question, Dr. Hans.
Yeah, yes, it does. Thank you. But, you know, I think as citizens, we're still very uncomfortable and worried about should there be an oil spill, if we are truly prepared in Guyana. Also, you know, we don't really have a lot of expertise. While there's training happening, we still lack the expertise, or I should say there's limited expertise, because I don't really like the word lack. And I would hope that we'll get to the point where that we'll have the enough training and also put safeguards in place that the occurrence of oil spills become maybe, you know, a limited possibility. What's happening with the tanker off Venezuela actually is very worrying right now. We also have from Wally, for you, Mikhail, is there continuous and regular discussion via a living management plan with the fisher folks along the coast to gather data on fish behavior and changes in catch per unit effort as per like post continuous explorations and drilling? This is from Waldeck Prince.
Okay, it's a good question.
Yes, it's a very good question.
I think it's important to note that the Fisheries Department really has a fairly strong data collection scheme where persons or officers would go out and engage with fishermen within the different regions. Moreover, the Fisheries Department has scope along the entire coastline, particularly in regions where there is a high incidence of fishermen and fishing activity. So some of the data that usually is collected, of course, are related to the biological aspects of those fish, lengths and weights and so on. And it's not just for the artisanal sector, but also the industrial fleet, where the catch per effort unit is monitored regularly. And of course, if there's any changes, we would share that information for us with the industry, and then of course, with the National Fisher Folk Organization and subsequently the cooperatives. So in a nutshell, yes, there is work that is being done. The fisheries management plan is currently being updated to include more aspects with regards to oil and gas development. And as such, I think there's been a lot of work in that regard. To answer the question.
Yeah, and I do have two more questions coming in for you. One person is saying that the fisher folk were not able to see the oil spill plan. And is the document yet public? That's the first one. And are these fisher folk too in Guyana, are they organized in representative groups, right? Like for instance, so they can look at social impact assessment studies and so on. And are we also talking more about, I think what he's saying, about artisanal fishing practices? So those are the two. So one is the oil spill contingency plan. I think there's still, I'm not sure if there have been public consultations on it as yet. I know there were groups contributing to it, but in terms of it going public, where is that at?
Yeah, I think, Dr. Raquel, much like you, it would be remiss to say that the plan is public and so on, but I know there have been large consultations with varying groups, of which, of course, extend to fisher folk organizations. And that would actually run us into the next question.
Yes.
About the representation about our local fisher folk. particularly the artisanal sector, and how they are represented. Now, we have present with us here one of the chairman of a co-op society, and like his co-op society, there are a few others that exist in Guyana where they are
Okay.
together, and they are expected to share these ideas and engage with management, and also manage the fishermen that are subscribed to these different organizations, and that is of course represented by the National Fisherfolk Organization of Guyana. So the representation does exist. It is a fairly structured system which our fisherfolk fall under, particularly the artisanal,
Mhm.
and they are fairly represented at different levels. So I think having assessments of the social impacts really would start from the cooperative level, of course, in tandem with the fisheries department and so on.
Okay. All right, thank you. And for Bangkok, I had a question for you. I saw in your presentation you had something about EFH. I don't know if I missed it. What is EFH? And if you could give us a little more insight in sarcasm, what you with sarcasm, sargasm, sorry, and impacts
EFH,
Guyana's at risk
sorry,
for like sargassum explosions and so on.
yeah, EFH is short for Essential Fish Habitat.
Okay, thank
And
you.
yes, and you were saying about sargassum.
Yes, and Guyana are we at risk? I know with climate and warming seas and so on. I think that's one of the thought processes behind the explosion of this species or these species within the oceans. Are we more at risk here as the years go by? And also about the linkage to oil. I mean, should there be like an oil spill? Would there be a linkage between sargassum and oil? Or is it more linked, the explosion linked to the rising temperatures?
In terms of the link, there isn't any other than its physical appearance, because
Mm-hmm.
when in the ocean, most persons think of it as oil, but because of its appearance, that is. And in terms
Okay.
of us being, uh, well, threatened by it, I wouldn't say that for sure, like for now, but in coming years, probably. Because of our position and where we are least likely to be affected. However, the amount that has been coming ashore has increased compared to
Years.
2014 when we first had reports of it.
Okay. I saw a few years ago, I was privileged to attend a presentation at Earth Optimism in 2017, where there was someone from St. Lucia, and he actually was able to start making fertilizer out of sargassum. I don't know if it was one or more species, but he had a lot of success with it. Is that something that is being considered in Guyana? Have there any, I know you say you have an interest in the species. Is that something that have you in your research come across in Guyana?
Sorry, I didn't get that.
Yeah, the sargassum, a few years ago, I attended a presentation in Washington where there was someone from St. Lucia who was making fertilizers from sargassum. Is there any research in Guyana related to that or any potential?
Well, apart from my study, I haven't came across any, and this is information from the relevant agencies. There are no studies done on sargassum
Right now?
in Guyana, and I know of persons converting sargassum into economic benefits, like using it to make fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, that is.
Yes, yes, it was.
Recently in Barbados, chemists, they are using it to make cosmetics. like bar soap and so on. And other than that, and like some countries are now using it to probably make medicine, but because of its ability to
Mhm.
absorb heavy metals,
So there is some
research.
potential for some other uses. Yes. Mikhail, there's another question coming in. Oh, sorry. I think you broke up. You weren't finished.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, I think you broke up a bit, so I'm sorry if I cut you off there for a second. Mikhail, another question coming in is how much data is available regarding artisanal fisheries catch prior to this industry commencing? I would assume the oil industry. Is the data available? If the data is available, is there a plan to monitor the catch after the work begins? Is there a plan to implement mitigation plans should the results of the data collection indicate that the oil industry is having a significant economic effect on artisanal fisheries?
Thanks for that very comprehensive question, Dr. Thomas. Um, the forest aspect of the question deals really with data collection. And as I've mentioned before, this department, I guess from its inception, would have had a very robust data collection scheme, particularly for artisanal fishing, as they make up a very large portion of the fishing community in Guyana, right? So it's like, let's say it's the largest subsector in terms of numbers. Yes, there is data, and we do use that data to understand how fisheries is in terms of catch and so on. Without reason that says that it existed before the development or Guyana's forest oil production. So we are, like before, continuously monitoring and receiving data in the department, which would allow us to really understand whether there are any impacts. However, in terms of plans, we've had our artisanal fisheries management plan handed over to the government recently. And of course, the oil spill contingency plan and our fisheries management plan, which is being updated. So there are considerations, of course, for the impacts of oil and gas on the fisheries community. I think, moreover, the government has made in its mandate a commitment to fishermen who are displaced or affected by oil and gas to have some form of compensation with regards to that. And I know our Honorable Minister of Agriculture, Zulfikar Mustafa, would have mentioned a lot about it. You can check the Ministry of Agriculture's Facebook page to see a little bit of his discussion with regards to the fishing environment and particularly compensation for fishermen in the event of oil spill. So I know the interest is there, and of course we are working towards having things in place in that regard. So the answer to all of the questions in that case would be yes, yes, and of course it's in the works. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, thank you very much. We have a comment here from Major General Joseph Singh, and he's saying, given the oil discoveries offshore Suriname, we may need to factor into our contingency planning collaboration with Suriname to deal with any spills, the conservation of our coastal fauna and habitats of our aquatic species, and also to protect the livelihoods of our fisher folk. We also need to agree on a marine protected area as a component of our national protected area system. I congratulate and thank our presenters. So more comment. Thank you very much for that comment, Major General Singh. Also, Danuta is asking if maybe we can have a webinar on the regulatory framework for oil and gas with expertise able to assess the viability of this framework. In terms of, we're looking, people were concerned about the flaring that went ahead, polluting the entire global environment and making Guyana now a polluting country. We cannot take any of this at face value. We have seen Guyana's, in terms of our contracts and so on. So we will discuss this, Danuta, and perhaps have it for another session, because we're looking to see what we will discuss in our next sessions. I think there was another one for Bankole. Bankole, we have a few more minutes. Could sarcasm increase and wash up, complicating the oil spill emergency response, perhaps in case of an oil spill? I know in Barbados, sargassum wash up is becoming a major issue. Would you like to take that, Bankole? I know you were talking about Barbados, but in terms of the wash up and how it's impacting them.
Yeah, sure. Like my colleague said before, the trajectory of the oil spill would not come into our exclusive zone, economic zone, and that would not really affect plans to respond to an oil spill. However, the wash up of the sargassum, it has been a problem for many countries. But in terms of Guyana, we have not had that large deposit of it. And there isn't much study done to link the two. So I don't think it would affect it.
Right, so that might be a great area for you to continue with your master's and your PhD in the future, Bankole. There's a lot of work to be done on that aspect. We have a question here that anybody could take it. Maria, I don't know if Maria wants to jump in on it. You know, it's not an easy question, but thinking forward about revenues from oil and gas, what kinds of investment might be a priority given to aim at supporting marine environments and fisher folk livelihoods? So what do we need to really invest in? Maria, you want to take that? Because we haven't heard your voice for a while. And Mikhail and Bankole, you're free to jump in as well. We have 2 more minutes.
I think Mikhail can be able to respond to this because I mean he has the experience, so to speak, with the fisher folks there. Yeah.
Yes. But we're talking about marine environments as well as how it impacts fisher folks. So we're talking about the larger marine environment. So if you think there are any key things that needs work, you're free to express as well.
So, Mikhail?
Oh, sure.
Mikhail, you want to take that?
Sure. I think it's a really good question, actually.
Yes, it is.
One of my slides, I actually alluded to the fact that compensation or corporate social responsibility usually takes the form of a cash payment to fishermen in the event that something happens. But in terms of investment, that is a pre-action. So I think for sure that research is an area that we need to develop.
Exactly.
So oil and gas funds really should be going to strengthening our research programs within each of those different institutions that are charged with regulating the industry. So research for sure. That's one that we would really need. In terms of understanding how the impacts of oil and gas affect fisheries, I think we need to take an approach where oil and gas companies or even revenue can ensure the success of both sectors in a way that is very synergistically pleasing. So having plans which are marine spatially sound in terms of development, where fishing grounds are located, and so on is the next area that we really need to spend a lot of money on, which is remote monitoring and so on. So I believe really and truly the bulk of the money, if we would like to invest as a means of ensuring that our marine environment is protected and the livelihoods of all the participants within the marine space, not just exclusively the fishermen, are protected, we would need to have a lot of foundation research done, local research that is, by local researchers as well. And of course, that would be the start of something very good and prosperous for us and our marine environment.
Yeah, so I certainly think that that would be a priority for us, and also an investment in training. and in training a cadre of Guyanese as well, as we learn from other countries, but also to ensure that we are becoming, educated as well, so that we can help to manage our own resources as well, and also the impacts. I think Tracy wants to ask a question. I see somebody took off their mic. Anybody else? We have to close now. We're 1 minute over, but I'll take a last question. If anybody has any comments or questions, final remarks that they want to jump in with, I will open the floor for anybody who wants to jump in. If not, does anybody have any closing remarks from the panelists, the three panelists? If you have any closing remarks, you can make it now. Maybe just do 30 seconds and we close. I see there's another comment coming in. Similar situation, Guyana and Suriname offshore development in to Guyana and Suriname. There's offshore development in South Africa. So we need to look. We need to look at and learn from examples everywhere, right? So just 20, 30 seconds, and then we'll close, and we'll certainly keep everyone informed of our next webinar.
Yeah, Doc, if I may be allowed to start.
Yes.
Very brief. Yeah, so I'd just like to say thanks to everyone who's really taking the time out to view this webinar. I know we would have liked for the discussions to extend a bit further, but this is all that we have for time. And I'll also like to thank in particular, I see a lot of persons from the Fisheries Department present here. So the support is always welcomed. And I'd just like to wish all Guyanese happy Yumanabi, because I know it's on holiday today. And we're here sitting in front of the computer discussing oil and gas. So yeah.
Yes. Yeah, it just shows how important a topic it is. It's really on the foremost of Guyanese minds right now, and probably Surinamese as well. So closing remarks from you, Maria.
Yes. Once again, good evening, and thank you all for listening in this presentation. I can see some of my Chinese colleagues are here, and also my university colleagues.
Awesome.
Thank you for being up so this morning. And thank you guys for all of the questions. I want to say thank you to Ms. Annette Arjun for preparing this wonderful webinar. Of course, you, Dr. Rockwell, and Stella. I look forward for more questions later on. I have my Facebook and WhatsApp there. It's fine. And happy Eid. So thank you again.
Yes, Bankole, any final thoughts?
Yes, special thanks to everyone for taking time out to listen to us, and to all my friends from university and at home. Thank you for listening. I want to thank the GMCS group for giving me an opportunity to share the little knowledge that I have. And happy Eid to everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very, very welcome, and happy as Yom Nabi to everyone. We thank you for joining us today. Bankole, we wish you well with your graduation, which I think will be happening next month at UG, but many ideas for postgraduate work in the pipeline there. And I thank everyone for joining. I see many friends have joined us tonight. We will keep you informed. I hope Annette is on. She's not too well, but I hope she's on tonight. And we will certainly be keeping you informed about when we'll have our next series. Next presentation for the series. So have a good night, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the holiday.